All right, so somebody over the long weekend requested that I put up the notes for the Man poem, and I'm just doing this very, very quickly, not the usual way that I do it, because I know that some people are writing their paper twos for the rest of this week and possibly early next week. So I will go through the poem and I'll explain everything. And then what I'll do is I won't go over the specific questions that the teachers in my school chose to question the children with, but I'll just do basic exam preparation questions, if I can call it that. It is very, very difficult to find notes for this poem. You have to know where to look, you have to double check things. So, this is something that I've put together over the many years that I've actually taught the poem. So, I'll read it through and then I'll explain it. The Man. An almost forgotten acquaintance was in town recently. I noticed that it started raining just as he ambled in. I remember him as a simple man. Growing up, we all wanted to be doctors, lawyers, and teachers, so the blood could ebb out of the village. My friend had much more sober dreams. He asked the heavens to grant him the imposing peace of the blue gum in his backyard, and that all the poor send him their tears, so he could be humble like the sun, so the red wax of the stars would not drip onto him. I remembered that man today, and all I think of is his unassuming radiance like that of a blushing angel. As for his dreams, he tells us whole forests invade his sleep at night, so there is only standing room for the dreams. So a few things going on here. I'll do the notes from top to bottom as they are on the right-hand side of the page. So the Man, almost forgotten acquaintance. I remembered that man today. All of that have a squiggly line underneath it. And the point of this is that the man does not look for the fame and the accolades associated with what he is doing. Obviously, he has made a mark, he has made an impression. It seems that his whole way of living is there to help others. But unlike celebrities and politicians and many other people, he's not looking for the fame that goes with it. His name is not mentioned. They speak about him as being almost forgotten. Later on, you see that the poet goes from calling him an acquaintance to a friend. He remembered that man. And even if you look at the similes and metaphors and oxymorons in the poem, the point is what the man is doing, not the man himself. You will also notice that I've circled the lowercase i's, and that is because I believe the poet is humbling himself in the face of a man who seems to see the bigger picture. And this refers to the poet and all his other friends wanting to be doctors, lawyers, and teachers. Those aren't necessarily bad or negative things, but it's almost like a brain drain that you learn of in geography. So, people in rural areas or developing countries building themselves up, growing, prospering, and then leaving the country in search for a better life. What ends up happening is either everybody is going to the city or everybody is emigrating, and the other towns, cities, and rural areas are left with nothing. It's mostly the very, very young and the very elderly that are left. And that is how you sort of kill off a town. And that's why the poet says the blood ebbs out of the village. If something ebbs, it means it decreases, it recedes. It's almost like the tide flowing out. Okay, so this man is here. He's humble. He wishes to help others. It's not about him that's important. While everybody else was busy dreaming about occupations that got you recognition or fame or money or status, he was looking towards other people. The other things that I've circled is the ambled, the ebb, the sober, and that characterizes this man. Um, Ambled is a slow, relaxed pace. He's not strutting, he's not calling attention to himself. You've got sober, which is serious and earnest, a little bit solemn, not flippant or flamboyant or anything like that, but thinking seriously about things. Then we've got imposing peace, humble like the sun, unassuming radiance, and blushing angel. And those are oxymorons. It's two contradictory words placed next to each other, to highlight, obviously, the contrast, but also to give a better picture of whatever's being described. In this case, it's the man. He wants an imposing peace. In other words, if you talk about his aura of peace, people should feel so calm and relaxed in his presence that you cannot ignore it. Okay, if something is imposing, it's grand, it's impressive, you can't take your eyes off it. And this is what he wants to do. He wants to give peace like that. Then we've got humble like the sun. So it is a simile. And you might think, but the sun is everywhere and it's hot and it's bright. How can the sun be humble? Well, the sun never asks for any praise or accolades, and sometimes we take the sun for granted. We all see it there, but how many of us actually stop to say, you know what, the sun is shining. It's a new day. The Lord has given me breath again to carry on. So that matters. It's humility. Then we've got the unassuming radiance. So unassuming means you are modest. Okay, you're not pretentious. If you've got radiance, it's shining brightly. Okay, it's brightness. So even his modesty seems to be a beacon for those around him. Then we've got the blushing angel. So generally, if you think of blushing, it's usually maybe out of embarrassment, or somebody caught you out, or you laughing at a joke or something like that. An angel wouldn't really do that. I don't be embarrassed by anything or by anything. As such, they are perfect beings, so they wouldn't have necessarily the emotions or the circumstances that go with blushing. So this man seems to be an angel. And then there's a dual figure of speech here, because his unassuming radiance is like that of a blushing angel. So there's a double figure of speech going on there. So if there ever had to be a blushing angel, and we had to see the brightness of that and the humility of it, then that is what we need to assume about this man. Okay. Then we've got remembered that man, almost forgotten acquaintance. So this person is kind of passed out of their minds, but when they see him, they remember him. And the other point is, everybody else wanted to be doctors, lawyers, and teachers, but they don't seem to have left the village. But this man has. And now he's passing through, and we're assuming that he's going somewhere else. So even this person that perhaps maybe they would have mocked, it doesn't say it in the text, but we're assuming based on the information, he has left. He has done something with his life. So that's most of it. Lastly, we've got the forests, and the symbol of forests we've got in psychology is the unknown. If you look at folklore, like myths and legends, it talks about courage and endurance. And in normal storytelling, it's opportunity, quest, freedom. So it definitely seems that instead of his dreams, which have standing room only, there's not a seat for them, his mind is taken up by these forests, the unknown, looking for opportunity, going on a quest, having courage. So definitely his humility and his way of life seems to have a profound impact. The other thing that I would like to point out, just before I forget it, is the rain and the blue gum. Now, if you are in grade 11, this is one of the poems that you would do, but in addition to that, you might also be reading Tsotsi. Now, in Tsotsi, he comes across the lady and the baby in a little grove, a little secluded area of blue gums just after it's rained. And those are symbols of renewal and cleansing and new beginnings and freshness. So I don't want to read too much into the poem, but I think it's significant that he wants the piece of a blue gum and that he came into town when it was raining. Maybe his presence has brought people back to reality. Maybe it will give them something to look forward to. It's quite possible that, a blue gum is something there. It gives shade, it gives peace, and that is what he wants. It's interesting that they also say the poor send him their tears. So wants to be aware of the suffering that people are going through to keep him humble. And then, as a suggestion, you can agree or disagree, but the red wax of the stars would not drip onto him. So, red wax, we might think, comes from a candle. A candle gives light. And he wants to be humble, so perhaps maybe he doesn't burn out what's around him. That is a possible interpretation. Okay, so it's already 12 minutes. So in the next 2 or 3 minutes, let's go over possible exam questions. In a poetry essay, they can ask you for structure, so the way in which the poem is written. They can ask you about diction, which is your choice of words, and they can ask you about tone, theme, and imagery. Imagery are the pictures that you get in your mind based on the diction and the figures of speech. Tone is the feeling that you get from reading it, also based on how the person has written it, the subject matter and how they address it. And the theme is certain things that we learn from the main story. So the main story, person comes into town, the poet remembers them, moves on. Okay, what do we learn from that? Occupations of prestige are not always the be all and end all. We can learn about humility. We can learn about having an impact on the world. So those are takeaways, if you want to call that, from the main story. So they could ask you for a poetry essay. How does the diction, imagery, and structure of the poem reinforce the message of the poem? So you're looking at 3 different paragraphs, the diction, the imagery, the structure, and then in each of those you would need to explain how those individually show the message. So you would then also need to include what the message actually is. Normal questions they could ask you are identify and explain the effectiveness of the different types of figures of speech. They could ask you about the significance of the I being lowercase. They could ask you about the imagery of the blood ebbing out of the village. So, yeah, your basic poetry questions, looking at the imagery, the figures of speech, explaining your own words, things like that. All right. So hopefully that's a help. I will try and add a little bit more to it, but thank you.